Hey, we're glad you clicked on this video because we need your help. Alright, please share this with your clutch expert friends if you don't know the answer. But if you do, could you please tell us in the comments what model year, brand, whatever of clutch and flywheel you think this might be? Measurements are provided in the photos. We know it came off the back end of a 1960-ish Buick V6 Dauntless 225. But at the moment, that's all we know, and we need your help with identification.
Hello again, YouTube. Another weekend in the shop, continuing on with the efforts to sort of finish the Rochambeau associated with the 2A powertrain.
To quickly bring you up to speed, we're not using the frame. We may not be using the engine. We're definitely not using the tub. All of these are being separated, and this all started because we need access to the clutch. We finally have it. Now let's get back to Kenneth.
Okay, now before I attach the engine to the engine stand where it's going to need to live for the next little bit, I do want to go ahead and take this clutch off. Partially going to need to figure out what it is, partially because it'll be blocked by the engine stand while it's there. So removing it now is both necessary as well as suits the purpose of what needs to happen. This one appears to be held to the flywheel by 6 bolts, and those appear to be possibly, could still be 1/2 inch, but my socket is not deep enough to drop in. I think they're smaller than 9/16. I'll get a shallower 1/2 inch, or shallower 1/2 inch socket. Actually, it's a deeper 1/2 inch socket. Feels like it's the correct size. Again, I'm just removing, so I don't have any real objections to using the impact. Word of caution as you take these out, they are under a little bit of tension from the springs on the clutch. They need a thin wall socket. The bolts are slightly dissimilar. I think it shifted slightly when I removed the bolts, which is resulting in it not wanting to let the socket onto. Maybe that's not it. I'll go get a thinner wall socket. Okay, so I still want to use the impact because that wants to play games. Just hate using the impact with a non-impact socket. The clutch plate itself doesn't look too bad. There's actually a fair amount of friction material left on both sides, and it is set up to be friction on both sides, so that aspect of it doesn't look too bad. But not being able to release the clutch means that's going to have to be replaced. I think I'm going to go ahead and leave flywheel attached. I may need the flywheel to identify the clutch, so I'm going to go ahead and take the flywheel off. And those appear to be 5/8. And of course my 5/8 socket is not just within easy hand's reach. I just felt it move, so I don't need, not going to need a puller to get it off. Probably do need to keep a hand on it because it could decide to drop. Or not. There it is. All right, so we don't lose the bolts. And now we attach the motor mount, or rather we attach the engine stand. The way I prefer to do this is to detach the head and connect the head to the bell housing first. So I can already see that the original bell housing bolts are going to be way too short because the bell housing wasn't that thick. So let's see what size we need. 3/8/16. And a lot of those on this effort. This will be about 3 inches long, looks like. Yeah, that feels much better. Some of these were used on another project and were kind of abused along the way. Okay, so with that, it becomes a relatively simple matter of attaching the stand to the head. I think it's going to be a little easier if I lower it down just a little bit first. Require quite so much lifting and finagling. Set the locking pin in place and set the weight down onto the engine stand. I do believe there is supposed to be a handle for the engine stand itself. I'll figure out where I misplaced that. But the engine is now loose and mobile. And at this point, as you can see behind me, it's getting dark outside. So I think I'm going to call it a night, and we'll pick this up on another day. What we need to do, in our next step, we've got the engine pulled. We need to go ahead and finish pulling out the transmission transfer case. And we probably want to swap the rear axle because it's a Dana 44, which is a little bit more desirable than the Dana 41 that we've got with the other frames. So I think our next step is going to be to simply disconnect drive shafts and then disconnect the body mount that is here and its counterpart on the other side that is way down, kind of underneath the transmission on the other side. So disconnect those, and with the drive shafts disconnected, we should be able to lift the transmission up and out of the frame, and then swap the rear axle around, and then we should be able to roll this out of here and move on to other things.
It's at this point something goofy went with the sound. Here, listen. Yeah, he's talking. But what he did, he supported the frame from the back. Then he sprayed some penetrating oil onto the spring hangers. Got those removed from either side. Put some supports under the frame. Started removing the U-bolts, both sides. Got the springs out of the way of the shackles. And was able to then roll the axle out of the way.
As promised, back with the other axle. And so we're just going to kind of temporarily sort of attach it to this frame so that the frame can be rolled around and use the parts that I'm less likely to want to reuse from others. So I'm going to use the backing plates that were with this axle just because they're a different style of shock absorber than everything else. Do need to use a couple of the U-bolts because the U-bolts from that axle didn't survive, and they were in kind of rough shape anyway. So for my Jeep, I'll end up having to buy some new U-bolts, which is fine. Kind of prefer to do that anyway, making sure that these are going to fit. Might want to ream those holes out just a little bit to clear the rust. All right, so I just ran a 1/2-inch drill bit through the holes on these to kind of open them up, clean them up. They were really 1/2 inch to begin with, but they had been sort of corroded and rusted over the years, so they've gotten a little bit tighter. This will make things a little easier to work with in terms of being able to slide the U-bolt into the plate when we're ready. So what we want to do now is basically to grab a plate and a U-bolt, and we're going to bring an axle forward into position. Have to raise the pinion up and then raise up the spring. And when you get the two together, you'll feel there's a little hole in there that it wants to seat into. And then you're going to find out that you don't have enough strength to hold everything in place at once. Put a jack stand under the pinion. Will help hold things in the right place. If you've got the right plate, the shock mount will be oriented in the right direction and at the right side of the axle. This axle has a bit of a pinion seal leak. Press it. I had this together a minute ago. That is actually where that needs to be. Once again, I had it right where I needed it. Now it's moved. There. I don't know if I can hold it there. I'll have to tighten up some bolts. Should be a pretty big improvement. And I need just a little persuasion to get this other U-bolt in, and I can't get the socket on the front of the other one. Now you're putting these things in for real, you want to make sure that you tighten them down evenly. When you're putting them in just to hold the axle around the property for storage, vaguely snug is usually enough. Because that will keep the axle from going anywhere and keeping it attached to the frame. Now we just need to do it on the other side. This one should be a little bit easier because the axle will already be held vaguely in location. Yeah, again, you get the shock mount in the right orientation. It'll be on the right side of the bracket, and the correct side of the axle should be forward and to the outside. Done all of this right, I should just be able to kind of pull this into place. Persuasion works better if it's in the hole first. I'm going to try to cinch this up a little bit. Just far enough out of alignment here to make things difficult. That at least will kind of hold things where they ought to be. Okay, it's another day Picking up where we left off, it does look like the camera went dead yesterday and didn't get the reinstallation of the other axle into the frame. Really not that exciting. Mostly a installation is the reverse of removal. The big thing here was to make sure that the bottom plates went in the correct orientation so that the shock mount is forward of the axle and pointing to the outside of the frame, which is certainly a temptation for things to go together in the other orientation. So we've succeeded in putting the axle back in the frame. We're going to choose to leave the rear shackles out because they're not really necessary for just being able to store this. And the actual C shackles themselves are in pretty decent shape for reuse on one of the other projects that's actually going to go forward. So this is back in. It's got us in a place where we can go ahead and roll this around and store it. We finished pulling the transmission and transfer case out of this. And we've pretty well stripped the frame of any of the other pieces that we wanted to use for other projects. So this really at a point where we're ready to probably swap the rear tires just so that we have the matching tires and rims all on one frame, and then go ahead and set the body back down on the frame. That's a little bit of a procedure because we can't just lower it down on the lift because of the conflict between tires and the lift itself, all trying to occupy the same space. So we'll have a little bit of a procedure there in terms of getting the body below the lift instead of above it. But that'll be the next step of this, is just to kind of put it away for storage. I think I'm going to start by changing out those rear tires, and then we'll come back with the effort on the lift. All right, I said there was going to be a little bit of finagling to get the body back on the frame. This is the first step of that. I'm actually setting the body down on the stands so that I can get the lift disengaged from the body. What that does is that'll let me get the lift up above, so I can kind of hang the body from the lift instead of lifting it from underneath. That's less than ideal for a lot of reasons, but the reality is that the lift, the frame, the stands all kind of want to occupy the same space when they're holding the body from underneath. So it's much easier to set it down from up above than it is to try to figure out how to finagle the frame, tires, everything else underneath all at the same time. So we'll dangle it and or hang it from the lift instead, and then slide the body back, or the frame back underneath the body. Now, to get everything lined up again, what I'm going to do is just kind of try to drop the body bolts through the holes into the blocks, and then once they're through the blocks, I will work on trying to get the whole thing shifted around so that the holes will drop through into the frame holes themselves. So I've got my body block underneath that I can see through the hole here, and I'm just going to move it around until things line up. I may need to lift the body back up a little bit to get just a little bit more wiggle, but work this around until I can kind of get the holes to line up. Okay, I raise the body up a little bit. That one is kind of lined up through its hole. We'll work on the other side. The problem is, because these were sitting there, these are kind of jammed up now. There we go. Are kind of sort of in their holes. So now, you just kind of need to get the rear cross member or cross brace lined up. Now this is the same idea, albeit not quite as convenient in terms of lining up the holes through the body, through the block of wood, and then ideally down in through the frame. I've got two sets of holes here that are kind of close to each other. It just makes it hard to tell which hole is the right hole for what we're trying to do. There is a hole there that goes all the way through right now. I don't know if that's going to be the right one to go through the frame, but at least it kind of gets things in a position. And that one puts it in a position on the other side. Now I can go underneath and look to see, knowing that the front ones are vaguely lined up, are we close to the holes in the frame, or do I need to use the other set of holes? Today is the day to buy a lottery ticket, because those went right through the holes in the frame. So now we just go ahead and set some nuts on the back sides of those, and then we will set the body down and tighten things up. And this one is very close to some other things, and so it doesn't line up nice. Kind of needs to be held on both ends in order to get it started correctly. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and set it down. As always, if you like what we do us a favor. Like, subscribe, share, and comment. You know the drill. Thanks much. Take care.